Right, I'm Mark Nonestide, a volunteer at the East Brunswick Museum, and we're here at Chestnut Hill Cemetery for what's the 30th year of doing this historic cemetery tour. Chestnut Hill Cemetery was incorporated in 1863. It's what's known as a garden-style cemetery. These were cemeteries that took the landscape into mind when they were designed, and that's so very apparent when you walk through the grounds of Chestnut Hill and you get to the top of it, and it has this wonderful panoramic view of the surrounding area. And each year the East Brunswick Museum brings to life the folks that are here to teach us about the past and the history of our community. And tour goers walk through the cemetery. They follow candles that are in bags. We have about 500 of them through the cemetery, which will be lit up when it gets dark. And along the way they meet people from East Brunswick's history who give them a narration about their life and show them some objects and photographs from a long time ago.
Hello, my name is Henry Beebe. I died when I was 83 years old. I died in 1930. I lived in Oldbridge for only 25 of those, but those years were pleasant. I'm a veteran of the Civil War. I had enlisted in the Grand Army of the Republic in the vicinity of Oldbridge. In December 1863, I re-enlisted in the New Jersey Infantry, which I was a part of for 3 years. I moved from Oldbridge to Brooklyn when I was in my late 50s. There, I was a foreman at Brookfield Glass Factory. Later, I built a home and store which I sold ice cream and confectionery delights. The store was known as Burdell. It was a quaint little corner store that everyone knew was as the sweetest place in town. I prided myself in our wide variety of delicious ice cream flavors. There was also plenty of sweet candies to choose from. Sunday newspapers and monthly periodicals were always provided. Folks would sit and read the latest gossip while sampling my luscious treats. In the winter, I often expanded my business to a grocery store. Folks did not want to eat cold ice cream when it was already freezing outside. No matter the season, the Burdell was bustling with sweet tooths, gossipers, and peckiest shoppers. I also was accompanied by my wife, Miss Catherine Beebe. She sweetened my life, as I know candies and ice cream did for so many. Take my advice. Life is like ice cream. Enjoy it before it melts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation tonight. I'm going to be talking about some very difficult things. It's going to be hard to listen to, and it's going to be hard for me to have to talk about, but it's too important to not talk about it. A lot of people don't realize that slavery was not just something that happened in the southern state. It happened here too in New Jersey. Now, I'd like to show you some newspaper clippings. These newspaper clippings are from a New Brunswick newspaper, and they date from between 1792 and 1825. These are ads for human beings. One from July of 1809 reads, "A black boy, 9 years old, smart, active, and every way promising for a child of his years, is offered for sale, either for life or a term of years." Another one reads, "For sale, a healthy, active Negro girl, 10 years old, price $100. Right. This brings us to the enslaved people buried here at Chestnut Hill Cemetery. These people were owned by Abraham Barkaloo and his family, who were large landowners along the South River. The people whom he enslaved were buried along River Road, not far from here. In 1983, a developer was preparing to put in a housing complex on the site. In this picture, you can see the original burial site with a rough field stone marker. Archaeologists came in, the remains were disinterred, and reburied on the other side of the hill from where we are now standing. They put in a new gravestone along with the original field stone to mark the final resting place of these unknown souls. In 1809, Abraham Barkaloo made his last will and testament. He wrote, "I, Abraham Barkaloo, considering my mortality, do make this my last will. I give and bequeath unto Abraham, son of Stephen Barkaloo, Negroes Frank, Dick, and Kate. He goes on to name 9 other enslaved people, while others go unnamed. Now, we don't know what happened to the enslaved people mentioned in this will after Abraham died in 1814. Some of them could be buried here, but we will never know. New Jersey was the last northern state to abolish slavery. In January of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, it would take 2.5 years for word to get to the enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, to learn that they were free, which is why we celebrate Juneteenth. But slavery was still legal in New Jersey for another 6 months after Juneteenth. Why? The Emancipation Proclamation only applied to the states that were in rebellion, which were the Confederate states, not the Union states. So in 1804, New Jersey passed the Gradual Emancipation Act, which said that babies born to enslaved mothers after July the 4th, 1804, would be born free, but the baby would still need to serve the mother's master for 21 years if they were female and 25 years for a male. In 1812, New Jersey passed a law prohibiting the selling of slaves over state lines, unless the enslaved person gave their consent and it was witnessed by 2 impartial government officials. All right, so now it's 1818, and Charles Morgan, who was a Louisiana plantation owner, originally from South Amboy, was traveling to Virginia to buy slaves. But first, Charles came here to the village of Old Bridge to visit his sister Sally and her husband, Jacob Van Wickle. Sally's husband was a Middlesex County judge and owned a pottery factory, which was at the intersection of Old Bridge Turnpike and Bordentown Avenue, just about 1/3 of a mile from here. Now, as we saw earlier in the New Brunswick papers, they were advertising human beings, the sale of human beings. Human beings who were being sold here for $300 were worth up to $800 in the Deep South. So Charles Morgan and Jacob Van Wickle hatched a plan to circumvent the law. Being a judge and having political connections, Van Wickle was able to sign legal papers for human trafficking. Now, this slave ring involved at least 50 actors, including 2 congressmen, one of whom was Van Wickle's other brother-in-law, James Morgan, 3 Middlesex County judges, the Middlesex County clerk, who was also a trustee at Rutgers University, and even the governor of New Jersey. The governor of New Jersey sold 2 of his personal slaves to Charles Van Wickle, and they ended up being sold south. A total of 137 kidnapped, free, and enslaved people, including many mothers and their babies, the youngest of whom was just 2 days old, were sent into slavery for life in the Deep South. Because legally only New Jersey residents could send enslaved people out of state, Van Wickle's son Nicholas got involved to act as a middleman. Now, some of these lost souls ended up on plantations owned by 2 of Van Wickle's other sons, Stephen and Jacob Jr. All right, we're going to look for a moment at this document here. So how did they get people to consent to be sold south into permanent slavery? Well, what they would do is rip little children and babies from their mother's arms and ask the baby, "Do you agree to go south into permanent slavery?" When the child cried, the judges took that as their consent and signed off on the transfer papers. The mother was told, "Your child is going to Louisiana. What are you going to do about it?" Well, of course, the mother isn't going to abandon their child, so they had to consent too. Now, here is a document signed by Judge Van Wickle stating that Phyllis and Charles, age 1 year, 6 months, have freely consented to be sold as slaves for life and be shipped to Louisiana. Now, the location of Judge Van Wickle's property, where these people were entrapped, is less than a half a mile from where we are standing. If you go down Old Bridge Turnpike and turn left, go down Old Bridge Turnpike and turn right onto Main Street, you go under the Highway 18 bridge. The house was about where the electrical substation is now, on the opposite side of the street from Bauman Row School. For more information on what happened here, go to the Lost Souls Memorial Project on Facebook. All of the documentation is from the Scarlet and Black website. In closing, let me share a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by bad people, but the silence over that by the good people." Thank you.
Hi, welcome to my grave. My name is Jacob Schmock. I'm buried here with my wife, Amelia Schmock. I was born in 1827. I was a farmer in Hillsborough, New Jersey, until I moved here when I was 57 years old in 1874. I ran Bloomfield Mills right down the street on Main Street. I was a licorice mill. At Bloomfield's Mill, we made a lot of licorice. We imported the licorice root from Turkey and the Middle East because of their soil. We made it into pastes, syrups, and I made licorice gumdrops to sell to the local kids. During the Civil War, I served in New Jersey's 14th 1st Volunteer Company. Also during the Civil War, a company up in Boston took the licorice and made a hard shell and made today what we call a jelly bean. So the licorice came from Turkey, came through New York Harbor, came to South River right here to Old Bridge. I died when I was 82 in 1909. Thank you for visiting my grave.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Blanc FW. I was born in England in 1870. My father was a notable local artist, James Thalford Crome, and my grandfather, James Thome, was a sculptor. My father went to study in France, and that's where he met my mother, Louise. They moved to England and started a family. My father brought my mother, myself, and my three siblings to the United States in 1873. We settled in New York, but sadly my mother passed away when I was 12 years old. We moved to the Old Bridge Village, and where my father enrolled us into the Conover School for Girls. Over here. In Old Bridge, my father married Sarah Bloodgood in 1884, and they resided on Willow Street, which is now Cosman Street. Many of my father's paintings depicted children at play in his paintings. There are several paintings of us where we were his subjects. I married Richard Rue, and we had two children together, Gerald and Milton. In 1916, Richard started a brick company in South Amboy named the R.U. Rue Company. The company mined clay and sand and manufactured and sold bricks and concrete. This area has abundance of quality clay deposits, which are part of the Raritan clay beds. In South Amboy, the clay came to the surface. There are several brick factories in this area that supply the entire U.S. with bricks, and they employed a good large portion of the population. Brick manufacturing in this area declined during the Great Depression. I passed away in 1969 at the age of 99, and I saw so many advancements in my lifetime, from riding a horse and buggy to men landing on the moon.
Good evening, I'm Henrietta Christian Wright. I was born in 1852. My family lived just down the hill from here on Willow Street, which is now called Cosman Street. I was an author, primarily of children's books, such as textbooks and fairy stories. My books were used in schools all across the country, and they're still in print today, 140 years later. My father and siblings died young. My mother, Rachel Wright, joined us in 1906 after she was brutally murdered in our home by an unknown assailant, potentially for the royalties from my books. Here we have a newspaper from 1906, which it says, "Reward for murderers, $500. I'll tell you about some of my fairy tales that I've written. In Peterkin's Twin Brother, Peterkin stops by a lake and he looks into it and sees his twin brother underneath the surface. He takes his brother's hand and enters a fairy world under the water. His brother plays a harp and fish swim around him, giving him pearls and golden crowns and treasure. But Peterkin knows he can't stay forever, and his fairy twin brother is sad to see him go, but Peterkin goes back to his home and tells about his adventure all to his mother and family. I also wrote a fairy story that's in Little Folk in Green, which is a compilation of different fairy stories that I've written. And there's a girl named Greta who's invited to a fancy party, but she doesn't have a dress because her family is poor. So one night before the party, a friendly wind spirit comes to her aid and flies her to the sky, and he gets her a dress made of clouds, sprinkles it with stars, sequins, and has the sunset make it pink. And she also gets a necklace made of crystal raindrops. And in that way, the fairy world helps her prepare for a party. Besides children's fairy tales and textbooks, I also wrote poems and other texts for literary magazines. One such poem I wrote is called A Confession. I was 35 years old at the time, in 1887. And I can read it out for you. So, this was in Scribner's magazine. It goes, "Do you suppose if all the world someday should come and stand beside my grave and say, 'Here lies one who can never be forgot,' I would care aught for it, if he came not? But if alone he came and said with tears, 'Here lies one that I loved,' then the years since we had met would quickly fade away, and heavens for me be reckoned from that day." So I wrote that 136 years ago, and I think I've changed my mind since that poem. Back then, I thought that I wouldn't care if the whole world came to my grave if just the person I loved did, but tonight I'm very glad you all visited my grave. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Saxton Bloodgood. I was born in 1848 and in this village of Oldbridge. My father was Joseph Bloodgood. He was the master blacksmith and wheelwright of Oldbridge. As a young boy, I worked in my father's shop. As a woodwright, I helped construct wheels for wagons and such. And as a blacksmith, we worked to turn wrought iron and steel into farming tools and wagons. When my father passed away in 1885, I moved out to Atlantic Highlands to get closer to the coast. There I graded land and brought back dirt to the cities where they built roads. I also had a very successful livery stable business. Back before the age of automobiles, the main method of transportation for both goods and people were horses. You would need a horse to carry a stagecoach or a carriage to carry people, and to carry a wagon to carry goods. What my business does was essentially a modern-day hotel, but for horses. I would stable them, care for them, and feed them, while not actually owning any of them. It was a very successful business, and my business ended up in the Atlantic Highlands Directory. Unfortunately, happiness did not last. I contracted tuberculosis. My doctors told me that the best medicine was the cold air of the mountains, so I decided to head out west and travel to California. I only made it to Denver, Colorado, where I passed away in December of 1900. In my will, I stated that $2,000 be allocated for this monument to be placed at my grave. Now, this is $2,000 in the year 1900. Nowadays, it would be worth about $75,000. This monument, I have not weighed it, but it must have been quite hefty because the horse that dragged it up this hill passed away while dragging it up. A truly tragic note to end my story. That is all. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Luella Brown. I was born in 1876. My father, Lewis Brown, was at the time the postmaster of Old Bridge, which served what is today East Brunswick, Spotswood, and Madison Township, later Old Bridge Township. I began working at the post office in 1894 when I was 17 years old, assisting my father. My family, the Jolies, were Democrats. Our rivals, the Applebees, were Republicans. Both of us owned general stores, which were suitable spaces for post offices. So when there was a Republican in the White House, the Applebees would be appointed postmasters and would run the post office out of their shop. When there was a Democrat in office, we would run the post office out of our shop. After my father stepped down, I assisted 3 subsequent postmasters, including my sister Maida Jolie, Bertha Chittick, and Herbert Appleby. I became postmaster myself in 1935. I served in that role for 11 years until 1946 when I retired at the age of 70. I died 20 years later. I was predeceased by my husband, Howard, and I had 2 children, Eleanor and Gertrude. Eleanor stayed in the area, Gertrude moved to Egg Harbor. A few years after I died, the township of Madison decided they wanted their own post office because over half of the residents already used Old Bridge as their postal address. They decided to change the whole name of the town to Old Bridge Township, which is why that's what it's called today.
Good evening. I am Robert Herbert. I am the grandson of Obadiah Herbert, whom which Herbertsville was named after, and that's what this area was once known as. I am buried here in the family plot with my wife Susie and Robert Jr. I moved out to Colorado after hearing about gold mining, and that is where I met my wife. We had 2 children while living out west, Robert Jr. and Elizabeth. In Colorado, I was a gold and silver miner expert and owned and operated several large mints near Denver, Colorado. Most gold in stream beds had long dried up when I arrived, but lode mining turned up huge veins of gold and silver. Lode mining, known as hard rock mining, requires many miners working together to extract the gold from tunnels or massive open pits. Working conditions in the mines were extremely dark and dangerous, with only lanterns and candles for light. To get the ore, which yielded 3 ounces of gold per ton of ore, was over 400 feet deep. In 1916, I came back east before the U.S.'s involvement in World War I to work for the Wright Martin Aircraft Company. The business was a venture between Orville Wright Company and Glenn Martin. The company manufactured planes for the U.S. in World War I. I also worked for the Unexcelled Manufacturing Company, which made fireworks, but during the war, made signal rockets and flares and smoke torches. I was vice president of the Dallenbach Sand Company, and my brother John Burr Herbert was the president. As officers, our annual salary ranged from $5,000 to $15,000 per year, which would be about $100,000 today. Dallenbach Sand Company was a sand mining operation that extracted sand from an open pit to create materials for the manufacture of concrete. Some of their materials were used to construct various buildings here in the county, including the New Brunswick Post Office and St. Peter's Hospital. After I passed away, my son Robert Jr. inherited my shares in the Dallenbach Sand Company. After the company moved operations from Dunham's Corner to Deans Hall Road in South Brunswick, a swimming hole was created when the pit filled with water. This would eventually become the community beach, which in 1994 became what is known today as Crystal Springs. I passed away in 1942 at the age of 82. Thank you for visiting me and have a nice time. If you visit Crystal Springs in the future, just remember that used to be the Dallenbach Sand Company.
We hope you enjoyed this tour. The East Brunswick Museum is where you can find more information about the history of the community and the people that lived here. I want to thank you for coming out and participating and enjoying the tour. Thank you.